Yow.
Hey guys, it's Will. It's Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, I thank you for finding us. If you could give us a sub and a thumbs up and all that fun stuff, it would be much appreciated. We're on the road to 4,500 subs. We only got, I think, like 150 more, and we're at 4,500. That would be amazing if we could hit that by the end of the year. Tell all your friends to come and subscribe, and it would be hugely appreciated. We're going to jump right into this video, although I do want to give a shout out to my Patreons because I was able to buy this release with Patreon money. You can give us $2 a month, you can give us $5 a month. All the money goes back into the channel. The releases I buy, sometimes I buy posters and memorabilia that we show off because we're trying to build this archive. I've done other videos about that on the channel. You can go and find those. I won't waste time in this video talking about that, but it really helps. We've had an uptick in the numbers on Patreon recently. We've been able to get more stuff. It's just so helpful. So I thank all those people. I do exclusive content, early release content. This will be an early release video in Patreon. I do polls, like rumors I hear about releases that are coming out, like all kinds of fun stuff. It's an awesome community. Check it out. What are we here to talk about today? So I firstly have to apologize. It's taken me so long to get to this release. This came out a couple months ago. This is the first ever release from Chameleon Films, a brand new Blu-ray label out of Australia. You can see 001 right there. And this is a Johnny To film from 2004. This is an absolutely classic Johnny To film from pretty early in his like era of classic crime films, which you could kind of say began in probably like 1998 or so. And this film stars Richie Jen, who is right here, and Nick Chung and Kelly Chen and various others, who you'll definitely recognize if you are a fan of Johnny To. A lot of his regulars like Lam Suet are in this film and stuff like that. So I'm going to talk a lot about this movie. I hadn't seen this movie in a while, and so I want this review to kind of focus on how freaking fantastic this movie is. But because this is a brand new label, I also don't want to let slip my review of the release. So what I'll say up front, if you're curious, is I think this is like an A+ release. It's just great. Like, I can't think of anything you would want on here that's not on here. Let me just tell you real quick. There's a 17-minute interview with Johnny To. There's a separate 12.5-minute interview with Johnny To. There's an 8.5-minute interview with Kelly Chen and Nick Chung, who are the stars of the film. There's a 3-minute 11-second long behind the scenes, which is really cool. There's an essay in here. There's a video essay called Propaganda Duel that's 6 minutes long, and there's a Frank Jen commentary track. So you get all of that shit, plus you get the movie looking and sounding really good. And there's actually a Mandarin language deleted scene, which I think is like 2 minutes long. And so that's everything that you're getting on this release. So this is a very good release that I think they put a lot of effort into making really fantastic. And then there's also an essay in here, which I'll show you. And the other thing that they do with this release that's really cool is that I guess in Australia, you have to put huge ratings on the cover of releases. So they do reversible artwork so that there is no rating, so that you just have the artwork and you don't have that giant kind of like stamp on the front there. And then to tell you who wrote the essays in here, we have The Show Must Go On, Cops and Robbers in Hong Kong by Haley Scanlon. This kind of analyzes the themes of the film and the way it's looking at the police and criminals and propaganda and the use of media and stuff like that. And then a Johnny To biographical essay by Mike Walsh. So to let you know what this film is about, you have these criminals who are trying to pull off this heist right here. And they're from mainland China, although as Frank points out on his commentary track, the guy has a very heavy Taiwanese accent. So he's very obviously not from mainland China. But they're like mainland Chinese criminals who have come to Hong Kong, which is something you see in a lot of films, right? Like Longer on the Law is an obvious example that comes right to mind. And the cops stop them. The cops are watching them and they stop them and they go into hiding. And there happens to be a news crew when the shootout happens between the good guys and the bad guys, the cops and the criminals. And so it becomes a news story, and the cops look bad in the news story. So this young police officer, played by Kelly Chen, suggests that they essentially wage a propaganda war against these criminals to make the cops look good again and gain back the public trust. So one of the things that's so fascinating about this film is it honestly is more relevant in 2022 than it was then. Like, this movie is about the use of media and PR and video editing and, like, how do you create an image of something and sell it to people so that what you want to be the truth is what people think is true, as opposed to them actually seeing the truth. And with social media, obviously, and with everybody and their mother having like an Instagram account, a Twitter account, with everyone spinning everything in every which way, and there being 50 billion versions of the truth, and the version of the truth that you believe being the version of the truth that you most want to believe, and not what the way that things maybe actually are. And instead of seeing a fully rounded picture of something, you see the version someone wants you to see. It's so relevant right now. And one of the other things I thought was really interesting about this movie is they use body cameras on the cops, which has become such a thing in the United States. And then, of course, very conveniently for the police, very often those body cameras aren't turned on, or the batteries ran out, or they were over their maximum capacity for their memory card, or they weren't uploading to the cloud properly. And oh no, where did the footage go? Sorry, we can't find it. But we promise you, everything went so well. It's that kind of shit, right? But this movie is 18 years old, and it's talking about this stuff, which is like what it's like living in America right now. And I think living in the world in general, especially the Western world, of like this giant propaganda media machine that just assaults you 24/7. So thematically, this movie is fucking fascinating and so well done. I think this is Johnny To's best shootouts are in this movie. Maybe don't quote me on that, maybe do. The opening shot of this movie is very famous. It's like 7 or 8 minutes long, and it's one continuous take that's a shootout, and it's fucking mind-blowing, and it is so complicated. And Frank Jeng actually talks on his commentary track about how they approached the cinematographer of Lord of the Rings to help them do it, and they explained it to him, and he's like, no, that's kind of complicated. I don't want to do that. But Johnny To in the interview talks about, he said he did it kind of for two reasons. One is he wanted to challenge himself technically to be able to do it. But the second reason was that his two lead actors were mostly used to doing comedy, and he wanted to deeply entrench them in the world of crime films and shootouts and stuff like that, like really intensely through full immersion right away. And so they rehearsed this shot for 3 days. And they only had a 3-day permit to do it, so they only had one take to get it right, which is fucking insane to me. But they nailed it. And so he was doing it to, like, right away through rehearsal and shooting, get these comedy actors in that mindset through long periods of immersion in character and world of what it's like to be in a crime movie, which is really, really interesting to me in such a fascinating way. I love the way that directors approach the psychology of working with actors. I think it's fascinating, and the relationship between actor and character and stuff like that. Something else that Johnny To does so well in this film is there are a lot of shots in this movie that have multiple planes of movement. So there's one shot that comes to mind immediately where you have these two guys sitting on this little metal beam. It's kind of like a pipe, I guess, outside of a window, kind of hiding below the window, sitting kind of against the wall of the building. And there's cops walking along the hallway through the window. So you have two different planes of action, even though they're kind of overlapping and they're related to each other. And this happens a lot in this movie, where you have chaotic movement happening in multiple locations or multiple like planes within a location. And all of it is so perfectly orchestrated that you're never confused. And that's something I think John Woo does like really fucking well. Because if you watch the films of someone like Michael Bay, who's very obviously trying to do what John Woo is doing, but he can't do it as well, right? And I'm not trying to like, whatever, if you like Michael Bay, you like Michael Bay, right? But if you watch a Michael Bay shootout and you watch a John Woo shootout, I often find that within the chaos of a Michael Bay action scene, I don't really know where I am within the physical space. You get lost because he's not good at piecing it together in such a way that it's totally coherent. And it's more just about like the chaos and the violence and the central characters. He tracks them well, right? John Woo is fucking incredible at showing you a space, putting you in it, starting action, and then keeping you within that space in your head so you know where everything is and everything that's happening and where all the characters are and where they're moving to and from. And he's just like, to me, John Woo directs gun action better than anyone ever. He's on like a different fucking planet entirely and no one can touch him. But Johnny To to me is like that next tier of gun battle directors, and I think this is his best stuff, and it's so well done. But also just his sense of spatial geography and like where you are in the scene is so good in this film. It's really kind of astounding. You also have this classic kind of Johnny To thing of the criminals being maybe like not necessarily better people than the cops, but like they're like decent people, right? And like they do bad shit, but they do good shit too. And there's like a gray area of morality. One of the things that I found really interesting about this movie is that to me, this movie goes beyond just being about cops and criminals. And it really looks at the nature of like bureaucracy and the way that bureaucracies are so thoroughly corrupt and so heavily weigh upon people's psychology and fuck up the way that people behave. Like, for instance, the Nick Chung character is obsessed with getting these bad guys. That's all he thinks about. Whereas the criminals, even though they're trying to hide and get away, are like, they sit down and have dinner together, and they like meet a family, and they're nice to them, and they talk to the kids, and like they're threatening and scary and menacing, but they're also not all bad. Whereas the cops are so singularly focused that they can't, it's like they're horses with blinders on. The cops have trouble locating their humanity in a way that the bad guys don't. But the cops think that because they're a part of this bureaucratic system that they believe is doing the right thing, that they are inherently right, and ergo they do not need to look outside of those blinders, right? And it makes them like obsessive and unlikable because they can't see beyond that to find compassion and humanity. I think that's a really interesting way to look at the situation that is unfolding in this film. One of the other things I love about Johnny To's films, and then I'll talk about the release itself, is he tends not to romanticize Hong Kong in the way that, I mean, you know, like in Throwdown, you see some romanticizing of the city, but in the way that someone like John Woo or, you know, another or filmmaker like that will kind of create this sense of whimsy and romance. And I think of Ringo Lam with the Christmas setting of Wild Search and the beauty of the city in that film. I think Johnny To just puts you on the street and he shoots it. And it's like, it is what it is. It's like day-to-day Hong Kong. The people live in their lives like it's a city. People live in the city. There's a street. People walk down the street. Like, there's no sense of romanticizing it and finding its aesthetic beauty. It's just like, let's just go, here we are. And that like day in the life kind of like street level view is something that I find really cool. So the Melbourne International Film Festival interview, like I said, 17 minutes long. Johnny To talks about his creative process. He talks about the opening shot. All that stuff I told you about the opening shot, that's from that interview. Then there's the Cannes Film Festival interview from 2004. What's interesting about that is that this is a co-production with China, international co-production. So they ask him about international co-productions, international sales, like business side of filmmaking. That's really interesting too. You know, which you don't really see. Typically, people talk about the creative side of filmmaking in these interviews, and he's talking about business, and I think that's kind of an interesting perspective on it. And then Kelly and Nick, in their interview, they talk about like what it was like working with Johnny To, what it was like working on an action movie, how he works with character and actor and stuff like that, what it was like being on the set and things of that nature. The behind-the-scenes thing is awesome. You see like the camera rigs that they use for all these insane shots. You see how they hid the track for the camera in the opening scene, because otherwise it would have been visible as the camera was rotating around, because I think they use like some kind of crane rig and all kinds of shit like that. It's just so cool. And then the Frank Zheng commentary. So he actually talks about how this movie was a co-production with mainland China, but was not released in China because they couldn't get approval from the authorities. And so it was actually considered to be a failure because it was supposed to be for both markets and was unavailable in China. And then he talks about the awards nominations he got. Like I said, he talks about the accent of the guy who's very clearly from Taiwan, even though he's playing a mainland China character, and like stuff like that I would never ever know. And Frank actually talked when I interviewed him recently. That interview is actually probably going up before this review, but it's not up right now. He talked about how one of the things he really wants to do on commentary tracks is to provide information for people who wouldn't otherwise have access to it. But I don't speak Mandarin, I don't speak Cantonese. I never in a million years would have known that about that actor, and so he points that out. And I just think that's his commentary tracks are just so valuable. He talks about why it didn't do super well when it came out. There's a scene where they make fun of Jackie Chan, actually, which is really funny. He talks about that. So the release is breaking news. I've been trying to keep these videos shorter because I know that they've been getting insanely long, and I apologize for that. So I'm trying to like keep the runtime down. I'm talking faster. I'm trying not to give as much information away about the bonus features and tell you everything that's on here. But I really highly encourage you to go out and get this. Is a fantastic release. I have nothing negative to say about it. My name is Will. It's Chameleon Films. It's Breaking News. It's Johnny To. It's Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. I thank you so much for watching as always, and we will see you next time.